Hey guys, today I'm looking at Puck's Thou Speak'st Aright, I Am That Merry Wanderer of the Night. This one was requested by Danica. Thank you very much, Danica. This is a really fun one. In this video, I'm going to talk about context first, and within that, I'm going to talk about characterization and also maybe some of the acting prep you might like to do. And then I'm going to break down the monologue meanings, and within that, I'll look at some Shakespeare verse speaking technique. The context for this monologue is really just that this is the first time that we see Puck in the play. So it's all about Shakespeare setting up for the audience, this is who Puck is, this is the kind of thing that he does. And of course, you've probably seen that there are so many different ways to interpret Puck in terms of character. In fact, I found a really great video of this. There's a guy that does 3 different versions of Puck within the one video, and I'll link it below because it's really good to look at just to get a sense of all the different ways you could interpret Puck. So if you're auditioning and you're doing this monologue, you really need to think about what do you bring to this character that you really want to bring out in this monologue. You really need to see like the key characteristics of Puck at play. Now there are some things about Puck that are kind of universal that most people will take on. He's cheeky, he's pretty naughty and kind of like dirty really. Like there's a lot of sexual connotations in this monologue and with Puck generally that you kind of want to think about how much you want to play those up. And also he's a bit of a lone wolf. He doesn't really have a posse as such. He's talking to Titania's fairies, which are not his group of friends. They're just kind of fairies that he knows. So that's another thing to think about in your prep is the fairies that he's talking to, how does he feel about them? I get the sense that they're probably enjoying the kinds of things that he's talking about because they would enjoy a little bit of mischief as well. But are there any fairies around that maybe he doesn't get along with one of the fairies, or maybe it's a little bit of a rivalry and maybe he's showing off? There's a lot of stuff about status at play here, and I'll dive into that a bit more as we go into the text. But overall, one of the first things that I would think about is where are the people that I'm talking to and how do I feel about them? Specifically, not just like it's a bunch of fairies, but like I love that fairy really ticks me off. And it will give you so much more to play with. You also want to think about in the same way, are you going to interact with the audience? If so, where are they? Are they an imagined audience, or are you going to have an audience during your audition that you're literally going to interact with? The other thing you want to think about in your prep is how much you're going to act out what he's talking about. The stuff that he's describing, he's basically kind of going, I go and do this thing and I'm really naughty and I do this other cheeky thing. But you want to think about, well, how much am I going to spell out for the audience? Here I am with a horse. Or are you going to be a bit more subtle and just play on the enjoyment of the scene and trusting that the fairies that you're talking to know exactly what you're talking about, and less about painting a picture for the audience of like, here's a horse and here's the old lady, that kind of thing. The other thing you're going to want to think about in your prep is getting specific about 2 things. Firstly, what exactly is he doing? And secondly, his point of view, his perspective. Let me break that down. Firstly, when he's talking about all the things he's doing, he's talking on a really surface level. But underneath that, you're going to need to decide what's the subtext here? And this is linking to how much do I want to play up that subtext? How much am I going to act out? More specifically, what did he literally do? Because you're going to need to have a picture in your mind of here's me as Puck playing this prank. And it has to be specific. It can't just be like, oh, I go and trick a horse. That is not specific enough. It'll come across as wishy-washy to an audience. And if you're not quite sure what I mean yet, don't worry. It's going to become really clear when I break down the meanings in a second. And secondly, that POV, the perspective of Puck. All the stuff that he's talking about, it's a lot about status in there. It's a lot about his take on the world. So when he talks about a horse, or he talks about an old lady, or he talks about whatever, you have to be thinking, how does he feel about that horse? Is he kind of laughing at it? How does he feel about that old lady? Is she gross? And the more that you understand his perspective of the world and all the things in the world, the more it's going to be rich and colorful and give all that characterization on a more detailed level. And the more that you understand his perspective, the more we understand about him. All those subtextual layers, they will give the audience a really detailed picture of who Puck is, just in those, 20 lines or whatever it is. Okay, so let's jump now into what does it all mean and how do I do my verse speaking and what am I going to do on stage? In this, in terms of the language, it's not hard to understand. It's pretty much what you think he's saying. What's hard is actually the subtext, and I will talk about that more. So the first line, let me just say, it is, thou speak'st aright, not thou speakest aright. It's abbreviated for rhythm, so don't add the extra syllable. I find it quite hard to pronounce, and I literally have to think, thou speaks to right, and then I can put it together. Thou speaks to right. Thou speaks to right, I am that merry wanderer of the night. Now that is exactly what it sounds like. I jest to Oberon and make him smile when I a fat and bean-fed horse beguile. Let's break this down. Firstly, I jest to Oberon. Basically, I play tricks kind of for Oberon's benefit. And this is a flex. This is him being like, I'm Oberon's chief mischief maker, and it's very much like a status thing. So when you talk about Oberon, it's really like, yeah, Oberon, not Titania. Now, fat and bean-fed horse. This led me down a rabbit hole of Googling, what did Elizabethan horses eat? Not that that's necessarily what you want here, but I do think it's interesting to think about the picture that he's painting. Like, why is he saying bean-fed? It's kind of funny, right? Like, we think about beans, we think of someone getting kind of flatulent. He's painting a picture of like a really fat, stupid horse, I think. So again, this comes back to that perspective thing that I was talking about. Like, what does he think about this horse? He's kind of making fun of this horse, right? And that leads into a status thing as well. He kind of looks down on a lot of people and things, animals, everybody. He's got a pretty big ego, I think. Now, beguile does mean trick, but it also is another thing that can have like a sexual or romantic layer underneath it. So if you're thinking about neighing in likeness of a filly foal, it means that he's changed his shape into a female horse. So what is that male horse gonna do, right? It could get really gross in your mind here. And if it does, I would not be surprised if that's what Shakespeare was going for. However, I would not necessarily personally want to act that out in any way. But you might want to think maybe the filly foal is being a little bit cheeky and sexy and flirty. And then that poor bean-fed horse is like, what's happening? I kind of think I can deal with that on a funny level without it getting too gross. I know that some of these kind of sexual layerings can seem really strange, and people do tend to resist them because they go, oh, that's not what Shakespeare meant. But it's really important to understand that actually it was a different time and sexuality was actually less taboo than it is now. What was taboo was like religion, talking about God on stage. That was like a big no-no, but talking about sex on stage was really fine. Now, if you're getting weirded out by any of this, just do whatever you're comfortable with. The reason I'm mentioning it is just so you get that sense of the context again, and then you can make your own choices from there. It's absolutely not a case of like, you have to put these things in. You really don't. It's your choice. Next, he goes on to, and sometime lurk I in a gossip's bowl. So a gossip's bowl, he's actually talking about here. So this is a commonly misunderstood. It's the gossip's like, she's drinking wine, basically like mulled meat or whatever it was that they used to have. And the roasted crab is like a roasted crab apple. And, you know, whenever I say crab apple, I always think of Mrs. Crabapple. And it was like a fruity spiced drink. So it's not like a bowl of soup with crabs in it. And again, he's just transformed himself into that little apple. So that's the in very likeness of a roasted crab. And when she drinks, against her lips I bob, and on her withered dewlap pour the ale. Now, withered dewlap, so that's actually like the like craggy neck that old ladies get. Oh man, it's coming. It's happening. So when she's drinking and there's this little apple, I'm imagining that he's like, nope, you can't drink. And he's like getting in the way of her drinking. And so she's like spilling stuff everywhere. But I also sometimes imagine that he's like popping out and like splashing or whatever. Like, make it really specific so you've got it in your mind. All that detail matters. The wisest aunt telling the saddest tale. Wisest aunt just means like an old lady. I imagine that he's going into like the tavern and there's like some lady that's drinking and then there's an old lady that's telling a story to all the people. And, you know, I remember in my day, sometime for a 3-foot stool mistaketh me. Again, it's just him being a shapeshifter. So again, he's pretending to be a stool. Then slip I from her bum. Down topples she. That's pretty obvious. He just jumps out the way and then she falls down. Then Taylor cries. There are a couple of different interpretations of what Taylor means, but mostly people just assume that she's talking about like, oh, my bum, because it's the tail, and falls into a cough. So she's just going like, ah! It's very evocative. Then the whole choir hold their hips and laugh and waxen in their mirth and neeze and swear a merrier hour was never wasted there. So the whole choir being like everyone that was around waxing in their mirth, I just think of like the moon waxing and waning, that kind of thing, so that it's getting bigger. So mirth being like the fun that they're having is like getting big and massive, and knees being they're sneezing, so they're kind of like all laughing so much they're starting to sneeze, and they're holding their hips and laughing. It's just what you would imagine when someone's like really doubled over with laughter. And this last bit, and swear a merry hour was never wasted there, that does need to go into the next line. They're not swearing while they're laughing. What they're doing is swearing that they've never had a better time ever. And swear a merry hour was never wasted there, all ties together. And that last line, which is sometimes included, but room fairy, here comes Oberon, basically means like, move aside fairy, Oberon is coming. Personally, I don't even know if I would include that if I'm doing it in an audition, unless it's been specifically listed for like a drama school audition where they've included it in the monologue. And that's it. Let me know if you have any questions, or if you have any monologues you would like me to look at for you. And to all of you out there, good luck for all the auditions that you're doing, and I will see you next time.